Imagine watching someone whose entire career is built around sexual attraction and assuming you already know what they want behind the camera. You see confidence, intimacy, desire, physical closeness, and a performance designed to look intensely passionate, and your brain immediately creates a simple conclusion. If this person does this for a living, they must always want sex. But that conclusion reveals more about human psychology than it does about the person you are watching. Because one of the biggest mistakes we make when understanding sexuality is confusing behavior with desire, performance with emotion, and professional intimacy with personal intimacy. The human mind loves simple explanations, especially when the subject is something as emotionally charged as sex. We see an action and we assume we understand the motivation behind it. But attraction, desire, consent, emotional connection, and professional behavior are not the same psychological experience. A person can perform intimacy without experiencing personal desire in that exact moment. A person can be comfortable with sexual behavior professionally while having completely different boundaries in their private life. And a person can look extremely confident on camera while feeling absolutely ordinary, tired, emotionally disconnected, or simply focused on doing their job. This is where the psychology becomes fascinating, because the human brain is constantly trying to turn visible behavior into invisible meaning. Think about how easily we make assumptions about actors. An actor can play a deeply emotional romantic character without actually being emotionally attached to their co-star. An actor can cry on command without being personally devastated. A comedian can make thousands of people laugh while privately having a completely different emotional state. A professional athlete can perform with enormous intensity while experiencing exhaustion, stress, or physical discomfort. We understand this distinction easily in almost every other profession, but when sexuality enters the picture, our ability to separate performance from personal experience often disappears. Suddenly, people assume that what they see must represent what the performer feels internally. That is not psychology, that is projection. We are taking an external behavior and filling in the internal story ourselves. This is especially important because sexual behavior exists on multiple psychological levels. There is physical behavior, there is sexual desire, there is emotional attraction, there is romantic attraction, there is curiosity, there is professional performance, and there is personal preference. These things can overlap, but they do not have to. Someone can experience one without experiencing all the others. That distinction is something many people fail to understand because society often teaches us to treat sexuality as one single category. But human sexuality is far more complicated than that. Desire can change depending on mood, environment, hormones, stress, emotional connection, fatigue, relationship status, personal boundaries, and countless other factors. Even someone who has a sexually orientated profession remains a human being with changing emotions and changing levels of desire. There is another psychological trap here, and that is the illusion of constant availability. When someone repeatedly performs a certain behavior publicly, people begin to assume that the behavior is always available. A singer who performs every night is not necessarily singing for pleasure every minute of the day. A chef who cooks professionally does not necessarily want to cook every time they enter their own kitchen. A fitness trainer can have days when they do not want to exercise. A person who works with intimacy professionally can also have moments when they simply want privacy, rest, emotional distance, or an ordinary experience that has nothing to do with sexuality. Profession does not erase personality. In fact, professional repetition can sometimes make a person even more aware of the difference between work and private life. The camera creates another psychological illusion. Cameras are incredibly powerful because they remove context. You see a few minutes of carefully produced material, but you do not see everything surrounding it. You do not see preparation, conversations, scheduling, contracts, lighting, direction, retakes, editing, breaks, fatigue, or the ordinary moments before and after the performance. The final product is designed to create a particular emotional impression. That is the entire purpose of entertainment. The viewer is not supposed to experience the boring parts. The viewer is supposed to experience the final emotional story. And when the story is sexual, the illusion can become extremely strong. The audience may begin to believe they are witnessing spontaneous desire when they are actually witnessing a professional performance shaped by an entire production process. This does not mean every emotion shown on camera is fake. That would be another oversimplification. Human beings are complicated enough to experience genuine emotions in professional situations. Someone can genuinely enjoy their work while still recognizing that the work is work. Someone can feel attraction toward another person and still understand the professional boundaries surrounding that attraction. Someone can be comfortable with their sexuality without wanting sexual interaction in every private situation. The point is not to replace one stereotype with another. The point is to understand that there is no universal psychological formula that says, because someone performs sexual content, they must constantly want sexual experiences. Now think about what happens psychologically when viewers confuse professional behavior with personal desire. They begin to interpret every smile, every gesture, every expression, every interaction as evidence of hidden attraction. This is a classic example of projection. Projection occurs when we unconsciously place our own feelings, expectations, or interpretations onto another person. If someone believes that sexual behavior automatically means sexual desire, they will interpret almost everything through that framework. A professional smile becomes attraction. Confidence becomes availability. Comfort becomes invitation. A performance becomes personal interest. And eventually, the observer is no longer responding to the actual person, they are responding to a psychological story they created. This is one reason boundaries matter so much. Consent and desire are not permanent states. They are specific to a situation. A person can consent to one interaction without consenting to another. A person can be comfortable in one professional environment and uncomfortable in another. A person can want intimacy with one partner and not want it with someone else. And none of these situations are contradictions. Human boundaries are contextual. That is basic psychological reality. There is also a misconception that people who work in sexually oriented industries must have unusually high levels of sexual desire. Again, there is no universal rule. Libido varies enormously among human beings, regardless of profession. Some people naturally experience strong sexual desire, others experience it less frequently. Some people experience desire primarily when they feel emotionally connected. Others experience it more independently of emotional attachment. Some people have periods of high desire and periods of low desire. Stress, sleep, mental state, relationships, medications, physical health, and personal circumstances can all influence libido. A profession does not magically override biology and psychology. In fact, one of the most interesting aspects of human psychology is our ability to compartmentalize. Compartmentalization means that people can separate different parts of their lives psychologically. Someone can be extremely professional at work and completely different at home. A person can have a public identity and a private identity. A person can perform confidence while privately being introspective. A person can be comfortable discussing sexuality professionally while still wanting privacy about their personal relationships. This is not necessarily deception. It is simply one of the ways humans manage different social roles. And there is something else people often forget. Repetition changes perception. When a behavior becomes part of someone's profession, the psychological meaning of that behavior can change. Think about a massage therapist. Physical touch is part of their job, but it does not automatically carry romantic meaning. Think about a doctor performing an intimate medical examination. The physical proximity does not automatically mean sexual attraction. Context changes meaning. The same physical action can communicate completely different things depending on the environment, relationship, intention, and boundaries involved. Sexual behavior is no different. Context matters. One of the most damaging assumptions is the idea that someone who appears sexually confident must have no boundaries. But confidence and boundaries are not opposites. In fact, psychologically healthy confidence often includes strong boundaries. A person can be comfortable with their sexuality and still be extremely selective about who receives access to their private life. They can be open about one part of themselves while being intensely private about another. Public visibility does not equal private availability. This distinction becomes even more important when we talk about relationships. People sometimes assume that someone who works around sexual content would automatically be unable to form a normal romantic relationship because their professional environment is sexual. But relationships are not determined by profession alone. They are determined by communication, compatibility, trust, boundaries, expectations, emotional security, and individual values. Different couples may have completely different definitions of what is acceptable within their relationship. What matters psychologically is whether those boundaries are understood and respected. Another fascinating issue is jealousy. People often imagine that if someone works in an environment involving sexual performance, their romantic partner must constantly feel threatened. But jealousy is not simply a reaction to sexual behavior. It is often connected to fear of loss, insecurity, comparison, uncertainty, and perceived emotional competition. Two people can experience the same situation and have completely different reactions depending on their attachment style and self-confidence. Someone with strong emotional security may understand the separation between professional behavior and personal intimacy. Someone who feels insecure may interpret the same situation as evidence that they are replaceable. That is why psychology is rarely about the behavior alone. It is about the meaning the brain assigns to the behavior. And this brings us to one of the biggest lessons. Never assume that you know someone's internal state simply because you can see their external behavior. Human beings are not transparent machines. You cannot look at a facial expression and automatically know someone's thoughts. You cannot look at confidence and know someone's emotional history. You cannot look at physical intimacy and automatically know someone's private feelings. And you certainly cannot look at someone's profession and assume you understand their entire personality. There is an enormous difference between this person performs sexual content and this person always wants sex. The first is an observable professional fact. The second is an assumption about a constantly changing internal psychological state. One is evidence, the other is speculation. This distinction is useful far beyond the adult entertainment industry. It teaches us something about how we interpret everyone around us. We constantly make psychological shortcuts. We see someone who dresses confidently and assume they are confident. We see someone who talks less and assume they are shy. We see someone who smiles and assume they are happy. We see someone who is physically affectionate and assume they are emotionally attached. But these assumptions can be wrong. Human beings are experts at hiding, adapting, performing, and managing impressions. The same person can behave differently in different environments without being fake. That is normal human psychology. A person might be highly expressive with friends and quiet at work. They might be confident professionally and nervous romantically. They might enjoy attention in public but crave privacy at home. They might be comfortable discussing sex but uncomfortable discussing relationships. They might have a strong public persona while maintaining a very ordinary private lifestyle. None of these things are contradictions. And perhaps the most important point is this: sexual desire is not an obligation created by someone's profession. Nobody owes sexual availability simply because they have previously performed sexual behavior. Previous behavior does not create permanent consent. A professional role does not erase personal boundaries. A public image does not give strangers ownership over someone's private life. This is where respect becomes psychologically important. When we stop treating people as characters and start recognizing them as complete human beings, our understanding becomes much more sophisticated. Instead of asking, why would someone who does this not always want sex? We begin asking, why did I assume those two things were automatically connected? That second question is far more interesting because it examines our own psychology. The human brain loves consistency. If someone repeatedly behaves in one way, we expect them to behave that way all the time. But people are not consistent machines. We are context-dependent creatures. Our behavior changes according to environment, relationships, mood, incentives, expectations, and emotional state. This is why a person can be extremely energetic at work and exhausted afterward. A person can be social at a party and need solitude the next morning. A person can enjoy intimacy in one context and want distance in another. So when someone asks, do porn stars always want sex? The psychologically honest answer is simple. No profession can tell you what a person wants at every moment. Desire is personal, variable, and contextual. And there is a deeper lesson hidden underneath this entire subject. We often try to understand people by categorizing them. We want labels because labels make the world feel predictable. We want to know, what type of person is this? But the moment we reduce a human being to their occupation, appearance, or public behavior, we stop seeing the complexity that makes them human. A person can have a sexually oriented career and still have ordinary insecurities. They can experience loneliness. They can fall in love. They can become emotionally attached. They can need reassurance. They can have bad days. They can want privacy. They can want affection that has nothing to do with sex. They can want companionship, friendship, respect, or simply peace and quiet. Their profession does not cancel their humanity. And perhaps this is why the subject creates so much confusion. People imagine sexuality as something that exists at maximum intensity all the time. But real sexuality does not work like a switch that stays permanently turned on. Desire fluctuates, attraction fluctuates, energy fluctuates, emotion fluctuates, context changes, human beings change. The healthiest way to understand sexual behavior is therefore not through assumptions, but through boundaries, context, communication, and individual choice. What someone does professionally does not automatically reveal what they want privately. What someone did yesterday does not determine what they want today. And what someone appears to feel from the outside may not match what they actually experience internally. The camera can show behavior, but it cannot automatically reveal the mind. That distinction is incredibly important because once you understand it, you begin to interpret people differently. You become less reactive to appearances. You stop assuming that confidence means availability. You stop assuming that physical closeness means emotional attachment. You stop assuming that sexual behavior means constant desire. And you become more aware of one of the most fundamental truths in psychology. Behavior requires context. So the next time you see someone whose profession involves sexuality, remember that you are looking at one dimension of a much larger human being. You may be seeing a professional performance, a carefully constructed public image, a role, or a genuine moment of comfort within a specific context. What you cannot automatically see is the person's private emotional world. You cannot know their desires, boundaries, relationships, insecurities, or feelings simply by watching what they do for work. And that is the truth that gets lost when we confuse performance with desire. A professional can perform intimacy without being personally available. A person can be sexually expressive without wanting sex constantly. A confident individual can have powerful boundaries, and someone whose career involves sexuality can still experience sexuality in their private life in a completely different way. The real psychological lesson is not about judging the profession. It is about understanding human beings. We are more complicated than the roles we play. We are more private than the images we present, and we are far more emotionally complex than the assumptions people make after watching us from the outside. Once you understand that, you stop asking whether someone's profession tells you everything about their desires, and you start recognizing the much more powerful truth. No visible behavior can give you complete access to another person's mind. So before you judge someone by what you see on a screen, remember this: a performance is not a confession. A profession is not a personality. And physical intimacy is not proof of constant desire. The biggest mistake you can make when trying to understand another human being is believing that what they show you publicly gives you permission to define what they feel privately. It doesn't. Every person has a private emotional world that you cannot see, and no amount of confidence, physical closeness, or sexual performance gives you the right to assume what is happening inside their mind. The truth is, human beings are not characters in a movie. They are not permanently locked into one emotion, one identity, or one desire. Someone can perform intimacy professionally and still want emotional distance afterward. Someone can appear incredibly confident and still value privacy deeply. Someone can be comfortable with sexuality and still have strong personal boundaries. And someone can spend their professional life surrounded by sexual imagery while having a completely ordinary, complicated, deeply human private life. So stop measuring a person's desires by their profession. Stop confusing access with availability. Stop confusing attraction with consent. Stop confusing performance with emotion. And most importantly, stop believing that seeing someone's body means you understand their mind. You don't. Real psychological maturity begins when you learn to respect the difference between what a person chooses to show and what they choose to keep private. Because the strongest form of respect is not assuming you know someone completely. It is understanding that you never will unless they choose to let you in. And that is the truth. Behind every image is a human being. Behind every performance is a person with boundaries. And behind every public identity is a private world you may never fully know. So judge less, assume less, and understand more. Because when you stop reducing people to what they do and start recognizing them for who they are, you finally begin to understand human psychology.